Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing a non-spoiler and a spoiler-filled review of Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the Live Ships Trader trilogy. It is the second series in the Realm of the Elderlings world, and I was very excited to pick this up given the success I had with the Farseer trilogy. I love that trilogy overall. I think it's absolutely excellent. I think Robin Hobb is an absolute master in creating very distinct worlds with very well fleshed out characters who are morally grey. I think she also is very good at world building, and she has very simple yet effective and beautifully written prose. That is what I want from my favourite authors, and she is definitely up there as one of them. So when I was considering picking up Live Ship Traders, I was a little bit nervous because I had heard more middling things about this. I've heard some people really love it because they really love the characters, but then other people don't like it as much, also because of the characters and also because of the setting. I'm not necessarily somebody who loves kind of like nautical based fantasy. It's not something that I necessarily actively seek, but I will say that whenever I have read it, I have generally quite enjoyed it as a setting. So coming into this, I wouldn't say I had like really high expectations, but I did have some expectation given that it is Robin Hobb and I've had generally very good experiences with her books. But I was also a little bit wary coming into it given that I had kind of heard things from either side. So before I jump into my non-spoiler review, I'm just going to do a quick summary of what Ship of Magic is about. This, as I mentioned, is set in a nautical setting and it has an entirely new cast. The story centers around the Vestrit family, their live ship Vivacia, I think that's how you say it, Vivacia, I don't know, somebody please correct me down below, and the far-reaching consequences of their decisions in a world filled with magic, slavery, politics, and seafaring. Now let's talk about what worked for me. I think the world building is really solid in this book, and Hobb, as always, is a master of creating very vivid, very deeply textured worlds. And whether it's Bingtown or the Rain Wilds, they feel real, and the lore surrounding the live ships is really fascinating and it's mysterious, which adds an extra element to it. I think also the themes are really well approached. The book explores very complex, very layered, mature themes such as generational trauma, slavery, colonialism, and gender roles, all things that I love in my books. She doesn't shy away from moral ambiguity, which also adds to the realism of the world. I think another aspect that I quite enjoyed was the character ambitions. The range of characters and their different perspectives is really impressive, and you can tell that she is aiming to construct a sprawling, morally layered epic, which I always admire. In terms of what didn't work for me, and I'll walk through this relatively quickly, is that the pacing for me was a little bit off in this one. This is a big book, and while I'm not against slow burns, in fact, I love slow burns, as many of you will know, I did feel like this book was a little bit too slow sometimes, especially for a first book in a series. Large sections of the book felt like they were meandering, with emotional beats stretched out over chapters that I think would test any reader's patience, even somebody like mine who, you know, I'm generally very patient with when it comes to literature. I really do not mind slow burns, but it has to still feel like it's pushing forward, and I didn't necessarily always feel like that in this book. The other thing is that I had some frustrations with the characters. I think morally grey characters are actually quite hard to write because they can often feel a little bit moustache twirly, or they can often feel like they're just so dark without any real gravitas to that darkness, if that makes sense. And I don't mind not having characters to root for, because even with other books where there are, you know, dark themes and very morally grey characters, I still even end up rooting for them just because you understand why they're doing what they're doing. While you get some of that in this book, I don't think it was done necessarily to the level that she did it in the Farseer trilogy, and I found it really hard to connect with certain characters for that reason. I'll come onto this more in the spoiler-filled section, so if you have read the book, I will go into this deeper. I do also think, which I didn't think she did in Farseer, is that there is a lot of repetition and over-explaining in this book. Some of the character dynamics and emotional states are overstated, are reiterated at length, and I think it made progress feel stagnant in the book, which added to the feeling that it was just going on for too long. Now, it's interesting I say these things because I'm a very character-driven reader. I don't mind slow burns. You know, in theory, this should have been a book that didn't impact me in that way. But I think it moved a little bit too slowly, especially for a first book. And I didn't really buy into many of the characters by the end of the first book as much as I would maybe like, and as much as I did in Farsia. And I think that's quite interesting. While I do appreciate that it was very ambitious and quite atmospheric, I don't think it was always as compelling as maybe I, would have expected, especially when I compare it to the Farsia trilogy. So that's my quick non-spoiler thoughts. Let's go into my kind of spoiler-filled thoughts. Now, I'm going to approach this differently to how I did Farsia trilogy. In Farsia trilogy, I had my Kindle literally right in front of me, and I was reading notes that I had made, highlights that I had, highlighted on my Kindle. I didn't do that with this book. I tried to at the start, but I just couldn't. And I think that also reflects kind of my perspective of this book. I just didn't feel, the desire to make notes, which I think is telling in itself. So what I'm going to do instead is kind of just talk basically about my thoughts in more detail. I will be talking about spoilers from now on, and we'll talk about some key plot points as well. So yeah, I think we can jump in. So I'm going to jump into key plot points first and how they landed for me personally. And then I think we'll go into, a couple of different areas where I'll talk about some other things as well. This might be a little bit disordered. I did make like very long notes, but with these sorts of videos, because you're thinking about so many different things, you can't be flitting back and forth. But anyway, I'm assuming if you're watching this bit, you've read the book, so it probably won't matter to you anyway. So let's get started. So the novel opens with the death of the patriarch, who is Ephron Vistrit, which essentially triggers the quickening of Vivacia, the family's life ship, which is a rare type of ship that is made from sentient wizard wood. Only after 3 generations die aboard does a ship actually come alive. And Ephron's death is essentially like the trigger for this story. It brings out immediate familial tensions. There's the daughter Althea, who expects she's going to inherit the ship, but it's instead given to her nephew Wintro via his domineering father, Kyle Haven. Now, I love family drama. I love family dynamics. It's one of the things that I look out for in any type of book that I read, whether it's fantasy or otherwise. And I think this foundational conflict was really rich with potential, but I think it takes a really, really long time to develop. And I get why she did it, but I think the emotional fallout is incredibly repetitive, whether it's Althea's indignation at how she's been treated, Wintro's disorientation for the position that he's been put in, Kyle's cruelty, how he behaves to those 2 characters in particular throughout this book. They all cycle without much progression for several chapters. Now, I think it's fair that you build that over time so you feel a real kind of kinship to the characters that are particularly suffering at the hand of Kyle. I think it was a little bit overdone, a little bit heavy-handed, to the point where, when we were getting Althea's perspective, I kept thinking, yeah, we get it, Althea. Like, we get it. We get it. You were supposed to get it. Like, we understand. And it felt a little bit too repetitive in my mind. That brings me, I mentioned Kyle, and that brings me onto a kind of another area that I maybe had a little bit of an issue, is Kyle is an interesting character in the sense that he's, very hateable, right? And he's positioned and written in that way. He is, in a way, the villain of the book. He seizes control of Vivacia, rips Wintro from his monastic life. So he was basically training to be like a priest, and he starts trafficking slaves to keep the family financially afloat, which is fascinating in itself. There's obviously a massive like moral quandary there. And, the kind of conversation here is, do you look out for the family, or do you do morally questionable things in order to keep the family afloat and safe and stable? To me, it's a pretty clear answer, but to some people that would be a moral quandary. His treatment of particularly Wintro is absolutely brutal. As an example, he has Wintro branded, beaten, and emotionally terrorized. It was hard to read at times, and I don't mind that stuff because I'm used to it. The thing that came to the back of my mind as I was reading his kind of reign of terror is that I didn't mind the grueling. It's the fact that he felt a little bit moustache twirly at times. And I don't know, maybe it's because I just really love the way the villain is done in Farseer. I can't help but compare. But I felt like the way the villains, because there are multiple villains in Farseer, were just so much more rich, particularly after the first book. I do want to make that very clear. I'm just referring to the first book alone. And that was a significantly shorter book, and yet I felt much clearer in kind of how these characters were panning out. And even though I don't think clarity is necessarily the issue here, I think it's just that I didn't really buy it, you know, which is surprising because I would have thought it would have felt, you know, emotionally realistic. But I don't know, it didn't feel that way for me, unfortunately. There is another interesting character in this book that I kind of felt a bit middling on, and that is a character who goes by the name of Kenneth. And he's a pirate captain, and he is, at least at this point, quite a morally complex character, and I've heard that gets explored even more in the later books. He wants to become the pirate king and manipulates his way into fame by freeing slaves and presenting himself as a liberator, all while profiting from the slave trade himself. And I love that sort of character. Just such a great kind of premise for a character, in my opinion. He captures Vivacia, wins over her loyalty through manipulation, and then severs her from the Vestrits. And there's a key event where there's a brutal battle. He captures Vivacia, and then through like coercion, charm, and psychological manipulation, he turns her from a grieving family vessel into a tool for his pirate kingship. And I think that was actually really, really well done. That was one of my favourite parts of the book. He's a really compelling character, and he's very problematic as well. Like, as an example, his charisma and his ambitions are like really fascinating, and his inner thoughts around women are quite disturbing. And I like the way that Hobb intentionally blurs the line between charm and abuse. I think it really showcases narcissism in effect, and it's uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people, or some people at the very least, might find that very uncomfortable. But I actually quite liked that focus on this quite obviously evil character, but showing how he's actually very effective at creating a sense of, you know, like he's doing good. And there's people like that in the political world right now. They're very good at charming one side while also kind of doing the most egregious things to the other side. I will say though, one of the things that I did kind of question is the overemphasis on how brilliant he is as an individual versus the atrocities that he has committed or is a part of. I thought that was quite interesting, and I wonder how that's going to play out in the later books. But I like his character. I think he's one of the most compelling characters in this book. Let's talk about another thread. Althea is another quite interesting character. So when she's denied her inheritance of getting Vivacia, she leaves Bingtown to prove that she can earn a ship's place by merit. I love that sort of kind of underdog kind of storyline. So she joins a merchant vessel under a false name, and there is another character who goes by the name of Brashen Trell, who is a disgraced former first mate of Vivacia, and he spirals into addiction, but is trying to be better, right? So he spiraled into addiction prior to the events of the book, and we see him trying to like regain his footing throughout the first book. Their arcs intertwine near the end of the book with joint plans to retrieve Vivacia from Kenneth in future books, which I'm assuming will happen, but we'll see. I felt like Althea's storyline, which is intended as a feminist struggle for agency, like very relatable, but it often felt quite disconnected from the core narrative, and it felt a bit jarring at times, to be honest. She's away from Vivacia for the entire book, so her emotional state feels theoretical rather than immediate. And I get it, because I'm assuming that will come into play in the next couple of books, and I'm quite curious to see how that plays out. But that disconnect does feel very real for the reader. And Brashen, while quite a sympathetic character, I think he just spends a lot of time floundering around rather than actually evolving as a character. So I'm actually quite curious to see how that plays out in later books as well. One of the most emotionally effective relationships in this book is between Wintro and Vivacia. Both are prisoners of circumstance. Wintro is a boy who is forced into adult cruelty, and Vivacia is a sentient being, a sentient ship exploited by those who own her. Their shared pain is really the heart of the story and an aspect that I did really like. I think the bond is really powerful, but I do think it is undercut by the pacing. Like, Wintro's growth is significant, but it happens in kind of fits and starts. And this, I think, is partially due to it being a multi-POV story. I think that can contribute to that feeling of it, you know, being a bit disjointed. And I think for some people, and I would argue this happened to me to some extent, by the time his arc really gets the level of depth that you want, honestly, I felt quite emotionally drained just because of like how long this book went on for. And I do think this book was too long. I think it should have been cut down a little bit because there are some really great beats by the end of the book, but I didn't necessarily feel the impact of them to the extent that I would have liked because I felt tired from the book thus far. By the end of the book, you know, several of the characters are at key turning points, but there are very few resolutions in terms of where we are with everyone. Vivacia has been captured by Kenneth, the pirate captain. She has begun to bond with him, partly due to his manipulation and her need for purpose and companionship. Wintro is still aboard at that point and is also forming a very strange kind of conflicted bond with Kenneth as well. We also see that Vivacia's personality is starting to shift from her time with Kenneth, raising serious questions about her autonomy and values going forward. It's going to be really interesting to see whether Wintro and Althea are going to be able to undo the damage of what Kenneth is already kind of laying the foundations for. In terms of Wintro, so he's obviously endured kind of brutal abuse, branding, physical punishments, and he's no longer the idealistic priest in training that we met at the start of the book. He is starting to adapt to life at sea. And he, as I mentioned, he's forming a very complex bond with Kenneth and developing almost like a codependent rapport with both him and Vivacia, which will be very interesting to see how that plays out. I think the thing I like about Wintro, and I'm very interested to see how it evolves, is how we are already seeing moments of insight and maturity, but he's also suppressing a lot of trauma just to survive. And I'm really curious to see how that plays out. Althea, I'm really curious to see how her arc plays out. At this point, obviously she'd returned to Bingtown briefly, only to find that, you know, her family home is in complete disarray. She's learnt that Vivacia has been taken by pirates, and obviously she plans to reclaim Vivacia and joins forces with Brashen Trell. The two resolve essentially to purchase and captain a life ship of their own, the Paragon, which is a notorious half-mad ship that has refused to sail for years. I have a feeling there's going to be some funny moments with that ship. I can't wait to see how it plays out. Brashen fired from his previous post due to addiction, but he started to get his act together. He's connected or reconnected with Althea, and they're going to rescue Vivacia. They pull resources together to get the Paragon, and that naturally is going to become the groundwork for book 2. Kenneth, as I've already kind of alluded to, he ends the book at his most powerful yet. He's a rising legend, a pirate liberator, ironically, and now the captain of a live ship. And he's beginning to consolidate political power among the pirate isles. He is incredibly manipulative, and the people around him, including Wintro and Vivacia, are slowly bending to his will. And his past trauma, including the loss of a leg, which I think hints at like childhood abuse, is being explored but not yet fully resolved, and I'm really, really curious to see how that's going to get explored in the next 2 books. The Vestrit family are financially collapsing, mainly due to Kyle Haven's decision, Wintro's father, and he has not yet himself been punished or removed, which kind of sets the tone of injustice, I guess. And Veronica Vestra is somebody that I've not mentioned, who is the matriarch, is beginning to understand the broader moral rot of Bingtown's ties to slavery and the old trader ways, which does set up some interesting political and ethical exploration in the next book. So it ends on a tone of unease and transition. Obviously, we're just setting up the character arcs now, and there is hope, but there is also a sense of loss, and you know, the people who are committing a lot of pain are the ones who are rising in power. Naturally, that power will hopefully over the next 2 books diminish. Very much the first act of a broader story. Everything is in flux, and I am quite curious to see how it all pans out. Overall, like, I liked aspects of this book. I just think it was a bit too long. The length of book 1 and book 2 in the Farseer trilogy was perfect. I think book 3 was a little long. I think this was a little long. Like, I think it could have been cut down quite a bit. It was quite repetitive in places. I am still intrigued, and I'm definitely going to continue on with the story, mainly because I know that it has kind of Easter eggs and connections to the next series, which is the Tawny Man trilogy, I believe, which I cannot wait to read. I'm so excited to read that trilogy. So for me, reading this trilogy is more like a means to an end. If it wasn't connected to Tawny Man, if this wasn't set in the same world as, you know, as the other series, I don't know if I would continue, to be completely honest, folks. There's so many other series that I want to read, but given that additional context, you know, I'm happy to kind of push through and do what I need to do in order to be able to get kind of maximum enjoyability from Realm of the Elderlings, because I really want to do that. So I liked aspects of it. There were a lot of aspects that I think were an issue for me, but I am curious to see how the story evolves and the characters evolve in the next 2 installations. So that's it for this video. Like I said, I think the videos for this trilogy are going to be quite a bit shorter than other series in this world. I mean, my Farseer ones were on average like 50 minutes to an hour. These ones I think are going to be like half that or a third of that time, just because I don't feel any inclination to make notes and really dig deeper beyond what I've already done in this video, but we'll still dig deep, just not as much as I have previously. So that's it, folks. In terms of what I rated the book, I think it's like a 2.5, 3 stars. Like, it's very middling for me. Like, it's meh. Like, it's not bad, but I wouldn't say it was good. It was okay. I don't want to say it's not good. Like, it's okay. It's okay. Not my favorite, not the worst. We'll see where we land. There's probably little bits and pieces that I missed out, but I think those are like the main things that I want to talk about. So let me know down below in the comments, especially if you've read this book, you know, what your thoughts were. Where does it kind of land for you in the broader Realm of the Elderlings world as well? I know some of you like really love this trilogy, which I think I understand. Maybe I'll understand it more once I progress throughout the series, but yeah, it was fine. Thanks for watching, folks. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing, and I will see you in my next one. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, take care, and I will see you very soon.